Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. We have all been watching the chaos associated with the anti-ICE protesters. But what is behind all of this? And who is organizing and funding it? Well, I came across this article by Matt Walsh, the What is a Woman fame, and he came out with an opinion kind of / investigative piece that I thought was really good, and I want to share it with you today. And he says, as we watch the rampant harassment and obstruction of ICE officers throughout the country, but particularly in Minnesota, it's become obvious that someone or some entity is organizing and funding many of these leftist agitators. That's not to say that we should delude ourselves into thinking that there's no grassroots support whatsoever for these anti-ICE riots. Clearly, millions of Americans support the open borders agenda. They've embraced every tenet of anti-American ideology that's taught to children in many schools from kindergarten on up. We can't deny that. They're causing the chaos we're seeing voluntarily of their own free will. At the same time, the scale of these campaigns to obstruct ICE and their effectiveness does not seem to be organic. Every army needs a general, after all. And that's particularly true when the army mostly consists of overweight, dead-eyed women hooked on SSRIs, along with gay men and 68 IQ Somalis. So who's the general of the anti-ICE movement exactly? It should be a cliche to say it's George Soros. But seriously, it is George Soros? And what... And whoever it is, what orders is the general giving? What's the command structure here? Well, to answer the question, some of my producers, he says, spent the last 48 hours joining so-called ICE resistance and ICE watch groups via Facebook, Signal, and other platforms. In Minnesota, the largest and most visible of these groups is called Defend the 612, or Defend 612, which is a reference to the area code of Minneapolis. In a prominent thread on Reddit on anti-ICE activism, Defend the 612 is one of the top recommended groups that you're supposed to join if you want to assist the movement. Elected Democrats in Minnesota have also encouraged their constituents to join the group, including the president of the Minneapolis City Council. The top council members in Minneapolis are going to do the work as they want you to do the work too by joining Defend the 612. So what is Defend the 612 actually? Well, if you pull up a flyer from the group, you'll see that they're committed to interfering with law enforcement operations, which they call obstructions. Put another way, they're committed to committing federal crimes, basically. Quote, every day, neighbors in Minneapolis are stopping and preventing abductions. Join us as we protect each other on our blocks, on our streets, on patrol, at schools, and at local hotels that are housing kidnappers. So they're bragging about criminal obstruction over at Defend 612. And they're also openly talking about harassing ICE agents in their hotels when they're sleeping. And on top of all that, it's not a very exclusive group. Anyone can become a member, as those Minnesota politicians indicated. And indeed, upon joining Defend 612, my producers were met with a network of signal groups and websites, including a patrol handbook that offers a series of highly detailed instructions. What's notable about the handbook is that at various points, it especially states that members shouldn't violate federal law. But in other sections, the handbook clearly instructs members to engage in criminal activity. For example, there's a section encouraging residents to enroll their friends in the resistance. And there is also a note in this handbook, by the way, that says if you are near a mosque, some immigrant communities have been told, quote, the safe monitors will be wearing highly visible vests, unquote. It also says if each and every block had a regular schedule of monitors, then abductors would not be able to operate in our city, unquote. Why might that be? Why would a group of legal monitors prevent ICE from conducting operations exactly? You don't really have to fill in the blanks on that one, right? Here's some guidance from a document provided by the same group. Quote, for ICE agents sitting parked in cars or driving around, lay on your horn and honk at them, or gather as many people as possible to whistle and yell at them to, and this is all in caps, chase them out. You can do this, and everyone is doing this. Phillips and Powderhorn, which are neighborhoods in South Minneapolis, do not tolerate masked abductors taking our neighbors. Form a crowd and be as loud as your commitment is to your people and get them out of here, unquote. Then there's this section from the patrol manual, which offers advice for members on how to call 911 on ICE, effectively by lying to the 911 operator so that they send officers and obstruct ICE. Quote, many 911 operators have been trained not to dispatch police officers if the caller mentions that ICE is involved. If you want a police response, it is straightforward to describe what is happening to 911 without saying the word ICE or immigration. For example, quote, there's two armed men in a vehicle. They're getting ready to hurt or attack someone. There's an abduction happening right now. They're taking her and they have guns. I'm surrounded by 3 cars. They're waving guns at me and screaming, unquote. Effectively, this is swatting the ICE officers. This manual is encouraging members to make up a fictional scenario which they know isn't happening in order to prompt a law enforcement response, with the obvious goal of obstructing ICE and potentially getting an ICE officer killed. Again, all of this is illegal. Everyone involved in producing and disseminating this manual is involved in a criminal conspiracy to commit federal crimes. And they're very well organized. Let's take a look at a section of the handbook that we talked about. It reads, quote, ICE encounters. What to do when you see these things? Number 1, request a plate check in the live call, which is dispatch or plate checker will confirm. Yes, these hopeless dweebs have a dispatch system, believe it or not. They'll see a car that, in their opinion, might be ICE, and then they'll call out the license plate number so that someone at home can compare the license plate to their list of suspected ICE vehicles. If it matches, then they'll flood the area and try to chase law enforcement out. In just a few hours, my producers saw several license plates and car makes and models being listed in that chat, along with their current locations, which obviously poses a safety risk to the public in general, as well as ICE. We have unhinged leftist vigilantes using unverified Excel spreadsheets full of license plate numbers in order to hunt down and pursue law enforcement. They even do the same thing with airplanes flying overhead. There's a whole signal chat for flight tracking. To give you an idea of how it works and how insane this is, around midnight, the following urgent message came into the northeast, southeast rapid response signal chat. It said, quote, Earl Giles employees locked in, ICE agents in parking lot. Well, that's a reference to a restaurant and a distillery in Minneapolis. Another user responded, numbers, description, please. Then came the reply, all clear at Earl Giles, MPD, following up on the potential prior ICE activity, unquote. So the employees barricaded themselves inside thinking ICE was on the way. That gets circulated around the signal chat full of these, LARPers and their dispatchers. And then we learn that actually there are no ICE agents anywhere. The police were called because these freaks thought that there were ICE agents, which, of course, isn't an issue if the restaurant doesn't employ any illegals. And then a few hours later, another update came in, and the workers at Earl Giles wrote, Ya nas and nu daran a salier se unieron muchas gente de la comunidad, muchas gracias, mil gracias, which, according to the Google Translate, means that they're grateful that the community alerted them to the potential danger. And according to common sense, it would imply ICE needs to pay another visit to that restaurant pronto. But then there was this remarkable exchange in one of the rapid response groups. It said, highly suspicious activity, very tinted windows, camped outside Prozana, went and parked around the block after idling for a few minutes, unquote. And then someone replied, I'm at Prozana right now, and someone else chimes in, sending to Prozana staff now. Prozana is a steakhouse in Minneapolis. And apparently, these losers called them last night because they saw a car with tinted windows that parked nearby. That's it. That's the threshold for highly suspicious activity for these lunatics. They're barricading themselves inside restaurants and running around the city because a car with tinted windows is idling for a few minutes. It would be entertaining if these people weren't genuinely, obviously unhinged. This is mass psychosis. And again, it's well organized. In addition to the dispatch system, the leftists are using a procedure called Salute. Yeah, Salute, to standardize the way they report ICE activity to the larger group. Salute is an acronym, and it stands for size, number of vehicles and agents, activity, what are they doing? Example, idling inside vehicles and, surrounding a home. Location, where you might include an address if possible. Uniform, that's tactical gear. Is it DHS, police, ICE, these type of things. Time, so be precise as possible, they say. Equipment, what kind of weapons, armed vehicles, other equipment are being used. And support, what is being asked for. Example, community responders needed now type thing. They want their foot soldiers to report in with the number of vehicle agents, what the agents are doing, where they are, what they're wearing, what time they've been seen, what equipment they have, all this kind of thing. Additionally, according to the Salute system, anti-ICE foot soldiers are supposed to specify what they want their the comrades to do. Normally, they request mob action. That's exactly what my producers saw, for example. Taking a look at a screenshot on it, The address is provided, and someone immediately responds, "We're 8 blocks away, headed there now." Then someone states at the same time, "I'm here. MPD has someone pulled over." After a brief bit of panic, where they wonder if Minnesota police officers are cooperating with ICE, the communists realize that the situation has nothing to do with immigration enforcement, and they disperse. They go off into the night, awaiting their next call. So, as you can probably tell at this point, this is a common theme. They spend half their time accomplishing absolutely nothing. In the rare case where they arrive at a scene that actually involves ICE, these agitators are encouraged to use their whistles and as communication devices. Here's a portion of the manual which translates their whistle language. That apparently, if they're whistling in short blasts, like bree 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 bree, like that, like that, then they're saying ICE is nearby or lurking, that type of thing. But if they're blowing continuously, like bree bree, like this type of thing, then ICE is currently abducting someone. So, as ciphers go, it's not exactly the Enigma machine, right? But it's pretty close. By the way, you know you're dealing with criminal geniuses when they need to consult a manual titled "How Whistles Work." I would have thought that whistles were, perhaps the most self-explanatory tools that was ever invented, but apparently these masterminds need a how-to manual, complete with illustrations, actually, and a step-by-step instruction manual. The other thing my producers notice, he says, unsurprisingly, is that many of the people in these groups took pains to hide their identity. They frequently changed their names on the signal group. They warned how ICE can supposedly hack Bluetooth and signal and GPS and everything else. There's a lot of paranoia and delusion in this movement, as well as a clear awareness that they're committing crimes. And while many of these people are harmless losers, really, some of them aren't. Some of them are nut jobs who actually want to start a much larger conflict. And they have a chance of succeeding based on what we've seen over the last week or two. That's why it's very important to figure out who's behind this organization, Defend 612 or Defend the 612. A man living in Minnesota named Mitchell Williamson has done a lot of research on this question, which my producers have verified and which we'll go through right now. Here's the top line summary. Defend the 612 is a tax-exempt nonprofit that in turn takes a lot of money from other shady nonprofits and even from the American taxpayer. Yes, you're funding the rioting and the obstruction that's going on right now. And the federal government is allowing this nonprofit to operate without paying taxes, which it shouldn't be allowed to do. It shouldn't be allowed to operate at all. So let's back up a second. Until a few days ago, if you wanted to donate to defend the 612, here's what you'd see on their website. If you were to look at the top, you'd see the words Corporation Canyon River. That's apparently the name of the real nonprofit that's behind Defend the 612. And in effect, based on this fundraising page, we can conclude that Corporation Canyon River is doing business as Defend the 612. So what's Corporation Canyon River? Well, you get the sense that you're not supposed to look into that question, because Defend the 612 recently took down their donation page on their website, including any reference to the Corporation Canyon River, Williamson was the first one to point this out, and he says, I verified it using the Internet Archive as recently as December of 2025. Defend the 612 stated on its website that it was the same thing as Corporation Canyon River. How they've taken now they've taken down the website, so it's not on there currently. But looking at all this, you start feeling like you're in a real life episode of the Chair Company, but it's all real. There's a genuine conspiracy here, and the people behind it are trying to cover their tracks. So let's take a look at the most recent IRS filings from Corporation Canyon River, where they're required by law to explain themselves to some extent. And here's their mission statement. Okay, this is what they say: the primary mission of Corporation Canyon Rivers, DBA Corporation Northfield, is to create social and environmental justice through grassroots organizing and direct democracy in Minnesota. We do this in 3 key ways: youth organizing through our program, Youth People's Action Coalition, which supports high school and middle school student activists in southern Minnesota in making social change in their schools and communities; worker cooperative support through training and technical assistance for local green worker cooperatives, particularly in the growing sector of compost collection and compost processing, as well as free-range poultry production; climate justice organizing through engaging Minnesota climate activists in the movement for renewable energy and to stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. We educate and organize communities in opposition to fossil fuel infrastructure expansion while promoting investment in renewable energy in Minnesota. That's what their statement is. Well, that's an inspiring mission statement, right? It's also not remotely related to what they're currently doing, which is disseminating materials that encourage the residents of Minnesota to obstruct ICE agents. They're not doing compost processing or educating anyone about fossil fuel infrastructure expansion. Somehow, they forgot to tell the IRS that when they said direct democracy and environmental justice. They meant harassing ICE agents, driving them away from crime scenes, swatting them, and so on. But things get worse when you look at who exactly has been donating to this nonprofit. Now, to be clear, we don't know the identities of the vast majority of the donors. That's the benefit of being a 501c3 nonprofit. They don't have to disclose exactly who's financing them. However, if other tax-exempt nonprofits donated to Corporation Canyon River, aka Defend the 612, then we can discover that information because those nonprofits are required to file a Form 990 where they tell the IRS about their donations. And that's where it gets really interesting. It turns out that in recent years, to give just 2 examples, Corporation Canyon River has taken money from the Tides Foundation to the tune of $10,000 and a nonprofit called MN350 to the tune of more than $75,000. Again, my producers, he says, pulled the Form 990s after they were flagged by Williamson, and here's what they look like. It shows that they got a donation from the Tides Foundation to Corporation Canyon River, and another donation from MN350 to Cooperation Canyon River. So what does that tell us? What does it matter that Defend the 612, one of the lead anti-ICE groups in Minnesota, has been taking money from the Tides Foundation and MN 350, whatever that is? Well, it turns out that the Tides Foundation takes a lot of money from groups like Open Society Foundations, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and the Ford Foundation. If those names sound familiar, it's because they're some of the biggest donors to left-wing causes in the world. Open Society Foundation is George Soros's outfit. That almost sounds too on the nose, right? Like it's a right-wing meme at this point to say that Soros is behind everything. But indeed, as a factional matter, Soros's group funds the Tide Foundation, which funds Cooperation Canyon River, which is otherwise known as Defend the 612, which is currently organizing mass anti-ICE activity in Minnesota. We say that George Soros is behind everything because when you dig to the bottom of it, you discover that, well, he is. But that's not even the most extraordinary data point here. The really amazing contribution to the Cooperation Canyon River Group, I was talking about the $75,000 one. Well, it came from MN 350, and no one has any idea what MN 350 is. But as Williamson found, it's a nonprofit that takes a lot of money from the state of Minnesota. In fact, they recently received $100,000 from the government. See where this is going? Taxpayers fund the government of Minnesota. In turn, the government of Minnesota funds the nondescript generic nonprofit called MN 350, which promises to save the environment or whatever. And then in turn, MN 350 gives a large sum of money to another random nonprofit, which turns out to be a communist front group. Keep in mind, there are probably many, many more donations like this that we don't know about and that we'll probably never know about. And this is just one nonprofit. A Facebook post identifies another group active in the Minneapolis area at the moment. It's called GR Rapid Response. They say they've had more than 4,000 people participate in 81 rapid response groups, which have tailed and boxed in ICE vehicles, as they put it. They've openly admitted to committing crimes. And there are real names attached to many of these posts. In cases where they use aliases, it shouldn't be hard in many cases to get subpoenas. This is a national scandal that demands an immediate investigation by the federal authorities. Fake nonprofits need to be shut down. Anyone disseminating pamphlets that encourage people to commit crimes, like the group ICE Watch, of which Renee Good was a member, should be arrested. In one of their recent pamphlets, for example, it's just straight up telling people to pull and push officers away from criminals they're trying to arrest. These are the materials that are meant to persuade the low-level foot soldiers, the lonely lesbians on SSRI, and so on, to impede or attack ICE officers. The materials are disseminated by bigger players, including nonprofits that are funded by taxpayers and powerful left-wing organizations. And then, if you zoom out even further, all of this criminal activity is enabled by leftist judges who do everything in their power to undermine the Trump administration. That the very well-oiled machine that underlies democratic activism. That's a reason why so many of the judges who have ruled against the Trump administration have names like Mehta and Frompong and Chutkan and Reyes. Democrats have installed an army of foreigners on the bench. The Democrats are counting on those foreigners to give their foot soldiers some much needed backup. That's why that's the only national and rational explanation for the lawsuit that the state of Minnesota just filed against the federal government, essentially asking a court to block the executive branch from carrying out its constitutional responsibility, which is enforcing the law. That isn't so much a lawsuit as a declaration of Minnesota's secession from the Union. Minnesota's government no longer believes it's governed by the U.S. Constitution or that the federal government has any authority within its borders. That's a lawsuit that under our federal system is an obvious farce. The federal government has the absolute authority to enforce immigration law under Article 1 of the Constitution. States cannot interfere with that power because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution. That is not a closed question. It's also not a federal invasion. It doesn't matter if the residents of Minnesota are offended by immigration law, or if ICE gives them the ick. It doesn't matter if the residents of Minnesota tell ICE that they don't want them there. It's not their call. Immigration enforcement is the domain of the federal government. But there is one element of this lawsuit that he says, I have to admit, is extremely entertaining. I agree. Defendants, this is the quote, defendants, the federal government, have intentionally violated Minnesota's masking law, which prohibits anyone from concealing their identity by wearing masks in public places. Wearing a mask in violation of Minnesota law is neither necessary nor proper. Defendants' policy and practice of wearing masks so that their agents can conceal their identities is arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion. Yes, Minnesota, a state where the National Guard under Tim Walz forced private citizens to wear masks during the COVID lockdowns, is now suing the federal government because ICE agents are wearing masks to protect themselves from leftist freaks. You have come full circle. And on top of that, in this lawsuit, Minnesota is accusing the federal government of acting in an arbitrary and specious fashion. Yes, the federal government is supposedly being arbitrary here. Not the state of Minnesota. It's totally fine for them to require masks, then sue you for wearing a mask without even changing the law. That's not arbitrary at all. If nothing else, you just have to admire the sheer gall and shamelessness on display here. We can be fairly sure, based on the current makeup of the Supreme Court, that this lawsuit won't go anywhere in the long run. But make no mistake about it. This is why Democrats want to pack the Supreme Court. They want judges to rubber stamp their efforts to dismantle the federal system that our founding fathers created. They want to destroy the constitutional order. That's what these anti-ICE protesters are really about. In Trump's first term, they pretended to care about kids in cages and child separation. Now they don't even have a pretext. They're just mad about the fact that the laws are being enforced. This is not an anti-ICE movement, really. It's an anti-American movement, and it's very well organized. What's needed now? which the administration seems to understand, is far more aggressive enforcement action. Don't just double the number of ICE officers on the streets. Go after the organizers. Go after anyone who's funding them. After a certain point, once the checks dry up, the cars are impounded and the agitators are sent to prison, it will end. Yes, they are well-funded and highly committed to their cause, but they're also very careless. They don't expect anyone to pursue them, which is why, he says, my producers were able to gain access to all of their groups. It's time to use their narcissism and their naivete against them, and to begin to crack down on left-wing terror cells that we've been waiting for ever since September 10th. I thought that was really good. And I know, it's something that obviously is just dominating the news for the most part. But I thought it was really good to really dig down a little deeper into what is actually going on. I've been telling you for a long time, these are groups that are organized. These are protesters that are paid for the most part. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of others out there, but the organizers are the ones that are being paid to do this and get people stirred up, and that's exactly what's happening. And here was just a little article and stating what little they were able to dig into in just a matter of about 48 hours. I would love to hear what you think about it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.